All right, so welcome everybody to the Validating Data Steward Personas from Thematic Analysis to Practical Application working group meeting at this year's, or like, you can't say this year's RDA, at the 26th plenary. My name is Shannon Sheridan. I am the Research Data Librarian at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, which is one of the national labs in the US. And I am joined by my co-chairs, Elizabeth Newbold, who Elizabeth, I don't actually know either of yours like official titles, so I apologize for that. Um, but Elizabeth is over at STFC UKRI in the UK, and Lisa Letsalou is in Italy with RDA Europe slash independent. And so we're really pleased that you all could join us today for this session. I think we can go to the next slide while I will drop in. I know Elizabeth already dropped in the meeting session notes. There's also, just because it was on that first slide, a link to the group website in case you're interested in learning more. Um, just a quick recap. If you are new to RDA or this is your first plenary, we're really excited to have you here. We've got these 6 guiding principles here just as kind of a reminder of what some of our principles are that guide us in the work that we do. So that is openness, consensus, harmonization, community driven. We are nonprofit and technology neutral and strive for inclusivity. If you are not a member of RDA, it is free to join. And so there is the URL down there. Hopefully, this and the rest of the sessions convince you that this is a really great community to join. And if you are not a member, we would love to have you. And then just one last bit of housekeeping before we start getting going on our content is a brief overview of our agenda. So we're doing the introductions here, and Elizabeth, Lisa, we didn't talk about it. I don't know if you want to take a second to like actually introduce yourself a little bit more, or yeah, okay. I think that might be helpful just because since we are the co-chairs, just to give people an understanding of who's leading the group. So. I kind of already did mine. I'm going to go with Lisa because she's unmuted, if you don't mind giving a 1 or 2 line introduction.
I'm just enjoying having a very quiet house where everybody's asleep and I can keep myself on mute. So hi everyone. My name is Lisa Lehtsalu. I'm currently doing some training for RDA Europe as well as consultancy as a data steward for some Italian universities and research collectives. My background is in data stewardship. I was a coordinating data steward at a research performing organization for close to 9 years. And then I moved to RDA Europe, where I did quite a bit of community engagement and community facilitation work. And still doing some of it now, and then also doing some consultancy work around data stewardship and particularly RDM policy at research performing organizations.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Elizabeth?
Hi, I'm sorry, I completely forgot who I was then. Elizabeth Newbold, and I work as Shannon said, I work at Science and Technologies Facilities Council, which is part of UKRI in the UK. And similar to Shannon, I'm based in one of what we call our national laboratories in the UK as well, where I lead on open science, and I'm technically the open science team leader there, which means I have responsibility for things like libraries, data stewardship, research data sharing activities, along with institutional repositories and so forth. Yeah, so I've been involved in RDA activities for a number of years now. My first plenary was actually plenary number 2, which was in Washington way back a long time ago now. So I just carrying on doing different things within RDA activities. And yeah, one of the things interesting at the moment is professionalising data stewardship, particularly what career paths look like for people. Is it something that's very close to my heart in thinking about how I can develop staff and things in our own organisation. It's a bit rambly. I also want to thank everybody who's joining at really strange, horrible time zones. For those of us in Europe, it's not the greatest time zone because just seeing where everybody's coming from. So thanks for joining.
I know I see we've got a couple of USA folks who are, it's, evening, so we got off a little easy for this particular session. So yes, thank you. And I saw our count went up a little bit. So if you have joined us and have not put your name, affiliation, and email in the collaborative notes, we would really appreciate if you did that so we can keep track of who's here. So that was our brief introduction, housekeeping. Where we're going to turn next is I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to kind of give the state of current work for what this working group has been working on in the past several months. We are a year and a half into the working group, more or less. And so we will be kind of, hopefully, not hopefully, we will be wrapping up in the fall. But so she has a lot of great content to tell you what we've been doing, where we are at, and what we still hope to do a little bit. And then we are going to dive into the working part of the working session, talking about categories and attributes that we have come across with the personas. And there we're going to really be looking for some feedback from you all. So that will be kind of the first part of our discussion section of the evening. And then Elizabeth is going to take over to talk about the persona template, where we would, again, love feedback. So, with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over. Oh, yes, Elizabeth, did I skip something?
No, but I was just going to say there aren't that many of us on the call. So please, if you have questions, raise your hand and unmute yourselves. And I think that would, let's try and keep this as lively and discussive as we can, given as I said, there aren't that too many of us. So hopefully we could do that.
Excellent point. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, we're a manageable size group. Um, but yeah, I think that brings us to the end here of the intro, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to talk about the state of current work.
Yeah, so we thought we would do a quick status update because, and I also see here that there are people on the call that might not be this familiar with the current status of the working group. So the RDA Data Steward Career Tracks working group, it was actually conceived in 2024, where the RDA Professionalizing Data Stewardship Interest Group finalized a global survey that looked at data steward career tracks. And in the survey, among other things, we asked the respondents a question of where do they see themselves professionally in 5 years' time. And the responses we got to that question were quite demoralizing because there were a lot of people who said that they felt stuck, they didn't see a career ahead of them in data stewardship, or they said that there's nowhere to go and they will. My mouse is broken, so it might just jump every now and then, so I'll go back. Our survey from the interest group coincided with the European Open Science Cloud Task Force on Data Stewardship Curriculum and Career Paths report that also indicated that there is basically next to no focused work done on data steward career paths. And this led us, on the one hand, from the interest group side, and on the other hand, from the EOSC task force side, to come together and start working on an idea for an RDA working group as a next step to build on the survey and the EOSC report. Obviously, this being an RDA, we went more global. So the working group, while it started in many ways with a European-based report and a global survey that through, I think it was 75% European respondents, We have been working now as a working group at a global scale. So the aim of the working group is to approach data steward career tracks systematically by developing methodology for data steward persona definition and by creating a sample of data steward personas. The working group was endorsed in April 2025. So a quick correction to Shannon that we're only 11 months into our working group, luckily. We aim to finalize by the end of the year. So the next plenary will likely be the last one for this working group. You've already met the three co-chairs, so Elizabeth, Shannon, and myself. And if you go to the working group website that has been shared in the chat already, you find our membership. And if you're interested and you're not a member yet, you can also join as a member. So when we talk about in this working group, we talk about personas, and we talk about developing a persona methodology for data stewards. I think many of you are probably familiar with personas, and you might have even, developed some personas if you're coming from IT services or perhaps library services. But personas are semi-fictional characters that represent a group. It could be users, it could be customers, it could be employees. Personas are constructed using real data, and this real data is used to make sure that the personas embody typical traits, needs, goals, motivations, challenges of these fictionalized groups. When we discuss personas and data steward personas in this working group, we focus on employee personas. So we're not talking about user or customer personas, we're talking about employee personas. And employee personas aim to segment employees and profile a specific segment of an employee or specific segments of a group of employees, in this case, data stewards. And they detail the characteristics, the attitudes, the wants, and the needs of those various segments. And employee personas are quite widely used in the world of human resources management, for example. And they support employers, but also community organizations, for example, in developing HR practices for those employees, for understanding the needs and motivations of different employee groups, and for tailoring training, skills development, capacity building for different employee groups. One question that we have received as a working group is the question of profiles versus personas. So we, as a working group, we are working on personas, but in order to build those personas, we have been drawing on and continue to draw on real data steward career tracks, real job profiles. For example, in our Zotero library, we have a collection of job ads that contribute to our persona methodology development. And from those real profiles and real career paths, and from our literature review, we abstract categories and attributes that can be used to then develop those fictionalized characters that reflect real needs, motivations, and challenges. We also build on the data steward skills and competency frameworks that some of you might be familiar with. So, for example, there's a recently finalized Horizon Europe project in Europe called Skills for EOSC, developed minimal viable skills profiles for data stewards. There are other such competency frameworks, for example, by the Elixir infrastructure. And those competency skills and competency frameworks, they contribute to our work. They provide some categories and attributes to our list of categories and attributes that we consider when building personas. And you will see our current list of categories and attributes in a second, and you will be able to work with it. So we are not seeking to, add yet another competency and skills framework. Rather, we are using the existing ones. They are part of our work. They're contributing to our work, but they're just, one section or one aspect of our work. So what have we been doing until now? We have been doing some literature review work. We have a Zotero library. And by the end of our work, the aim is to have a fully tagged Zotero library. So if you look at it now, it's very much still a work in progress. The tagging is a work in progress, but you start seeing a collection of scholarly literature, Cray literature, as well as competency frameworks that all support the categories and attributes and support persona development. We have also had and continue to have a speaker series where we have speakers who are data stewards and who present their personal career paths. So they provide real life examples for us that we are then able to analyze, abstract, and also contribute to our abstraction work, and they contribute to our categories, attributes, and methodology development. We have had already a number of co-creation workshops where we work together with the community. We started with a workshop in Ljubljana in September 2025, and I'm very happy to see Irena on the call. Irena was very kind to host us in September in Ljubljana. Then we had another one at the last plenary in Brisbane, so working with a community, more Australia-Oceania-based community, which provided a lot of valuable input to the group. Then just last week, we had a workshop with the Nordic Data Steward Network that allowed us to work with the community across Scandinavia and the Baltics. Now we have the workshop the collaborative workshop meeting here tonight. And then we move on to another series of workshops in April and May in the US, in UK, and as well as in Portugal. So the aim is really to work with the community to verify, to fine-tune, and to arrive at a methodology that takes into consideration concerns from across the community. And the final output is then the persona methodology. The final output, we currently envision something along the lines of what you see on the slide. So something that provides a background to our work, then provides a fully documented categories and attributes list, provides some templates, and provides some sample personas and linked career paths. And now for the rest of this workshop, or the rest of this session, we will focus on those categories and attributes and the template. You will be the first people to see our very first draft template. It will be premiered tonight, and will be then fine-tuned tonight and then in the coming workshops. So this is a quick overview. If there are any questions, we're very happy to take them because I think there's also people on the call who might be hearing about this group for the first time. So, but if there are not any questions at the moment, we can move forward. But at any time when something is unclear, please to raise your hand, alert us in the chat, and we can come back to things.
All right. So, as Lisa mentioned, we are now going to move on to the categories and related attributes. So, there's a Menti code up there. Don't worry about the Menti code quite yet. What we are going to do, and I will share it in the chat, is what I've just shared is a link to a Google spreadsheet that has the different categories and related attributes that we have been working on for what should be represented on a persona. If anybody is having access, I see, little profiles starting to populate, so it seems like that link is good. But please let us know if you can't access it. And so, what we're going to ask you to do is first familiarize yourself with this list of categories and attributes. We realize that this is probably the first time that many of you are seeing it. And then the first question that we have for you, and this is where the Menti is going to come into play, is we want you to pick the 5 to 7 most important categories that you think should be represented on a persona. Um, and this is kind of like the reminder, don't forget, we're not working on creating job profiles. It's about the more general abstract personas. And the reason we have such a variety here is because we've been coming across and realizing that personas might look different in different contexts. If you're looking at a national context, so this was the example we were talking about earlier today. For example, a national pay scale. If you are a country like Slovenia that has a national pay scale for data stewards, then a profile like salary might be really helpful. But if you are working in a context where that doesn't apply or that is not a helpful attribute, then it might not be one that you want to include. But we're thinking that higher level of personas. So I am going to stop talking here for about 10 minutes, let you all look at that, think about it. And in the meantime, I will also, Lisa has the Menti. I will copy the link though, so that that can go in the chat. So that if you want to put things in as you're thinking about them, you will find that you can enter multiple entries, so you don't have to do all 5 to 7 at once. So, is that clear? Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, I'm seeing nobody unmute, so I'm going to assume that I explained it perfectly. You all know what you're here to do. And we will come back at 10 minutes after the hour. We should be able to see Menti responses as they pop up here. And as Lisa said, if anybody has any questions about any of this, we are a small enough group. Feel free to chat, unmute yourself, ask questions however you like.
This is when we need the DJ, Shannon. for the background music.
I know, I was just thinking about we probably can share some audio.
I don't know. We might get told off for copyright as it's
And
recorded.
oh,
But
you're right, because this is gonna be made public. Darn. Sorry,
yeah.
everybody. I was gonna spin some tunes for you, but
And for those of you
There's
who were wondering what
plenty
we were
of
talking about, we
copyright-free music
sorry,
like that.
Andrea.
you're right. We could just do like
There's a whole website that developed during COVID for that like hold music for Zoom calls that are
yeah.
all copyright free.
Oh,
So they're
if only we
terrible,
thought about
but
They're terrible.
they've been used.
And you can add multiple responses into the Menti, so you can either add things into one box or you can add one category per box, whichever you prefer.
Hi, can I just ask a question also?
Absolutely.
Yeah, um, I was thinking, I'm looking now at the table, and yes, I had seen it before, but still, I'm just thinking that perhaps one of the things that we should do going forward is divide between the categories that a person can actually influence. Um, because some of the things are going to be related to the rules of a country or rules of the organization. Um, for instance, when we're talking about vacation days, I think I mean, it might be important, but it doesn't really, you can really affect it, either being a researcher or data steward, etc. You will have the same vacation days. So I think it's not, something that I would choose as important because I couldn't influence it. And I think this is something that I see also with some other categories, um, like remote work. It's important, but I think national wise, we have national rules of how much work you can actually do at home as an expert. So I'm not certain, but I see in this column of categories some of the things that that have different levels of importance or choosing from. I'm not certain how to name it, but the point is that I think it's important that data stewards might have a career track, even though that we see that basically they don't. It's important that you might have possibility to be domain specific, but some other elements are not something that you can actually influence on, regardless of which work position you would have. So I'm not certain if we want to separate that column. I'm not certain whether there were any discussions in this respect.
I completely agree, Irina, because I was actually thinking something similar when we get on to talking about what goes into the template or not, because I think um, yeah, I've been thinking the same thing that some of these are more like, and the point earlier that there are things that might go into a job profile or a job advert, but they aren't necessarily what we would put as essential criteria in the persona for people to draw on, but it might be part of the narrative that somebody might want to write to illustrate a persona. Because I agree, we don't influence about remote working. We have and our contract we have, that's organizational policies. So as an individual, they can't change it. So I completely agree as well that there are things here that I think that's one of the things, the nuance, I think, now that we've got this list that has come out of various workshops, and as we progress, that we want to sort of break down into which should go into the persona, which might be additional categories that people have talked about, but we don't necessarily want to put into the persona methodology. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, thanks.
And yeah, I mean, we haven't done that as a question, but it might be something that if you have any sort of thoughts about it, you could just put them into the chat or into the collaborative notes. If there's anything very obvious, but
I'll put the Google Doc uh, in case. Yeah, like what are the least 5 to 7 categories, or what are the 5 to 7 categories you consider least important or not helpful at all? And there's still plenty of time for those of you who are still working. We've got another 4 to 5 minutes, so take your time.
It's really interesting to see organizational culture come up on both of those. That um, it's one of those categories that I think it was, I don't remember, but it was added at one of the workshops and hasn't gotten much attention at others, but now is here. There's also we're conscious that there are categories that are potentially overlapping in there, especially if we get into the lower bit of the list, because there are things that have been included in various workshops, and some of them are somewhat overlapping. So going forward, we will also need to collapse some of them, and in our documentation define some of them quite well.
Yeah, I think one element that I see when you're talking about the technical skills or perhaps a knowledge of certain tools and softwares, it might be something that is also quite related to disciplinary kind of elements. So basically, yeah, and also then a focus because if you're really working with the data, you might need to have a bit more skills on certain tools that are being used. While if you're more, let's say, consultant, you might not necessarily have these. So I think some of the things will be really specific for specific personas. So when I'm talking about a data librarian, they will probably need to or will know some other things than really data steward that I would call more data manager. So I think this is how I see also your table, that some things will group together depending on the description. But yeah, and yeah, basically some things are just, go with the job, so to say. It's likely that, especially for smaller organizations, smaller countries, there will be more travel because you need to collaborate more. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I would say, kind of these soft skills and travel and some other elements are something that is really more expected of the job per se, because you would talk with people most of the time. Yeah.
That is an excellent point. And I'm sure, I mean, and that's part of this, right? The discussion and getting feedback, and so helping us craft those commonalities. So we appreciate the feedback. And I'm looking at the time. So that's been about our 10 minutes. If there is anybody who is still typing or still trying to get their answers in, could you just like throw up an emoji or something? Because I think, Lisa, once you like click to the next slide, I think they lose the ability to input things in the Menti mark. I don't use Menti all that much, so I'm actually not sure.
I think if they're typing, they can finalize their thing, because then they just get a notification that there's a next slide available, so they shouldn't
Okay.
lose it.
All right. So is anybody going to have heartburn if we go to the next slide? The next question? Okay, so then moving on to the next question. And this is where we're looking for what categories are missing from the list to develop successful data stewardship personas and persona-based career tracks. So things that you think might be important in whether it's your context, a context you're familiar with, something that we're missing entirely. So this one, I think since we don't have to review a list here, I'm going to give everybody 5 minutes to brainstorm, so that we still have time for the discussion after. So we'll do maybe like 4 to 5 minutes so that people can now brain switch and think about what's missing.
These two editions are really, really interesting because the question of how data stewards fit into the organization have come up, especially at the last two workshops, quite prominently. From the perspective of relationships that data stewards have to other support officers, from the perspective also of the data governance frameworks that might already be in place at an organization. So whether so along the lines of the existing data stewardship capabilities at institution. At a previous workshop, it was framed in terms of like, is it an organization that already has policies in place, or is it an organization that still needs to develop policies? Again, relationships. So this is really a topic we need to think about and clear up a bit the lower part of the list. So. And I really like the addition of emotional intelligence. We were just discussing with Shannon and Elizabeth before when we were preparing for this session that the list still doesn't fully include skills and competences, and we need to figure out how to integrate those properly there, and the soft skills or emotional intelligence that falls into that for sure.
I think we've got several responses there. Anybody else need to get their last one in before we shift to our discussion? Okay. Lisa, I don't know if you want to go back to the slide or to the spreadsheet, whichever you think is more helpful for people to have on while we talk. But so the discussion that we want to have, as Lisa kind of mentioned, this is the first time we're really showing this spreadsheet to the public, but we are amongst friends here. So, but as you can see, it is still very much in draft form, and part of this is making sure that the methodology for creating personas is replicable and reusable across contexts. So we're not saying, hey, here's the three personas and we're done. We are trying to give the community the skills to build these personas themselves as well. So part of that is documentation, right? Because we've been working on this stuff for a year. And Lisa, you're right. I always count Costa Rica as the start date, which I know is not technically true, which is good in terms of deadlines for us. But so for others to be able to use the categories and the attributes and have them be reusable, we know there needs to be more documentation, but we want to hear your opinions on what kind of documentation would be most helpful to make that happen. And so we're hoping to take the next 10 to 15 minutes to get feedback from you all. So imagine that you wanted to do this, whether it's for, your institution, HR needs your help making a profile, whether it's for a national group. Yes, Andrea, basically, there you go. Okay, so we've got a data dictionary on there, and I realize I'm going to keep these. Thank you for some of the people that are putting things in the notes. So I think we're a small enough group that we can talk out loud, or if you are feeling a little quieter and want to just drop something in the chat, or sorry, in the chat or in the collaborative notes themselves, either is helpful or any option is helpful. Andrea, can I pick on you and ask you to elaborate a little bit on the data dictionary and what sort of information would be in it?
Of course. So data dictionaries, as I have written them in them, have, the title of the field, a written description, examples. If you're going to have this in a particular format, then you may have, an example of the format. Say where we're making our own XML flavor for it, that would go in there. Anything that shouldn't be in there, so disallowed, or notes where, there's two similar fields. You're using this field for X and this field for Y. I'm trying to think of one that I can send you, that I can put a link in with. That's a good example.
It's okay if you don't have one right at the top, but that is helpful. I like the what's not allowed. That's a great, I think, category that frequently gets not thought of.
I think it's particularly pertinent for us because we do have things that, as you said, are potentially overlapping and that we need to disambiguate anyhow.
So others on the call, what sort of documentation would you find useful?
I'm not certain if this is directly connected, but I'll just put it out on a desk. So there's some work being done in the back for data stewardship registry and specification that would be linked to Zenodo. And I'm just wondering, because here what you are proposing, the working group will is it? I'm just trying to clarify. So the working group at the end of what you said, I think October, Lisa, in your slides, will prepare some personas that will then kind of describe a person, what would be his or her functions and work. And I was just wondering if this is something that could be then added as a category in the functionalities in the registers, because this data stewardship registry is supposed to be linked to Zenodo and also ORCID. But would that be useful? I mean, for me, it would be useful to know what my role is, but then it means that the dictionary that or some description that we are now discussing needs to be somewhere so that it actually clarify what a certain category actually means.
So the idea for us is that by the final output will be, this fully documented list of categories and their related attributes, and the persona template or templates. We will get to them in a second. And then some sample personas based on this. So just to exemplify what one can do with the template and the list of categories and attributes. So our aim is not to go and create personas, but rather to create the methodology and show how the methodology can be used. Because we figured that how people then adopt and adapt the methodology for their local context is quite context specific. So that's why we're do not plan to go and create any personas beyond the sample personas that we need to exemplify the methodology itself. But I haven't heard about the registry, I have to admit. So I don't know what it would exactly mean. So if you and how our work could relate to that registry. But it's definitely quite something that sounds interesting to explore how it could connect and how we could maybe bring our work into that in some way or another.
I'll try to find a link. I think it we published it in Zenodo, but I cannot find it directly. But if I do, I'll put it in notes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to unmute to thank, and it took like 3 clicks. Okay, so that's sorry. Now I'm just getting distracted by Zoom. Um, so that's really helpful. Good questions, I think, from people here and good feedback. Are there any other kinds of documentation? So data dictionary, I think, really spelling out those different attributes. Um, and I think also if people have ideas for how they even kind of now that Lisa has explained a little bit more about how we hope others will use this information, um, I encourage you to think broadly about documentation, right? Like, yes, it's the categories and the attributes, but is there any additional documentation that would help you in terms of putting that information together, guidance, that sort of thing?
And I was just going to say there's probably resources within our Zotero library that we've been collecting, which we will sort of also link to. So some of the documents about persona methodology, um, yeah, and Andrew, we would probably say that people should link to their own, organizational pay scales or any where any documentation that even if we don't have a link to the documentation, the sort of documentation that you might want to link to in your own context. We're
And just for
also
the,
thinking
oh,
like looking at job profiles is quite a good thing to draw on and stuff. So we've got our collection of job profiles, which people can add to as well.
I was just going to say, for the sake of matching the recording up with the notes,
Oh, sorry.
and so
Yeah.
that people can hear the comments, or if people are watching, Andrea posted, if there's a specific standard, e.g. for remote work or a pay scale, please link to it. And so I copied that over into the notes. All right. Last call for any other thoughts or comments about documentation. Okay. You are always welcome to add things in the chat or in the notes if you think of them after the fact. Please consider them, well, because they are living documents. So thank you. We're done. No, I'm kidding. Please don't log off. We still have one more section that we would love your opinions on and to discuss with you all. And so I am now going to turn it over to Elizabeth to lead us through that section.
Thanks, Shannon. So, based on the list of attributes, one of the things we did say is that we will try and create a template that can be used for people to write their own personas. And this is our very first attempt. Not a design expert by any stretch, so we've just been trying to mock this up in PowerPoint and Google Slides. So it's not expected to be beautiful or anything like that at the moment. But what we were sort of thinking is that we would want to capture some of the context specific, sort of the biographical almost type of information related to the data steward. So sort of a role titles, the role positions, and these are drawn from our list of attributes from the spreadsheet. So a section that puts all that sort of semi-fact, although these are fictional personas, that sort of more factual sort of information, which things like salary ranges we might only put if you might put if you want to, the contract types and things like that. We're not sure exactly what should go in all of these, which is where that come, but that we think is sort of more of that, the sort of top section to sort of set the scene for where somebody is working, and those sort of very practical aspects of it. And then the other sections we're thinking about the key points in the career journey. So building up, these are sort of a portfolio of attributes and categories. So maybe we would have the previous activities that somebody had. So for example, if the role was perhaps a first position or an early entry, for example, it could be something like a graduate entry role or something, then the previous key points in the career journey might be the narrative around somebody's educational background or how they moved into being a career steward, a data steward as a career point. And then we were thinking about the aspirations, and I don't know, we don't quite know how we will capture this based on things, but what are the aspirations for somebody who would be doing this role, to put that richness of where they may want to go next, what they're enjoying the role, what their learning and development might be, and where they see their career path going. So we can start to see how somebody could say, this is how they came into a role, and this is how they may leave that role or develop their role, because it might not be about leaving a role. Things could be about just developing new skills. It could be specialization. So any of those sorts of different ways that you can develop a career. And then the other areas we were thinking about is capturing motivations and expectations. Again, sort of what career progression might be, things around maybe management or leadership, and skills development activities. So this is kind of how we're thinking we might pull together a template. So drawing on the multiple attributes, things we don't want to, but and trying mapping them against the different aspects into the template, which is as far as we've got at the moment, because we're obviously still pulling out the attributes. Some of these, taking the data dictionary approach that we've just been discussing, might be quite easy to populate when you're doing something, because you sort of have a list of sort of defined terms to use. Other ones, such as motivations, expectations, and things, will need more of a narrative approach, and will probably map, we think, to a number of the different categories. And again, some of this might be taking Arena's point earlier, that we probably wouldn't necessarily want to say things like remote working and things like that as an actual category necessarily, but it might be the sort of storytelling that we want to put around somebody's aspirations or their motivations within it. But then again, that's something we would still need to discuss. So this is just our very early thinking and shaping. So I suppose for here is, does this overall sort of template sort of approach make sense? Are there other things we should be thinking about? Is there other ways we could be designing this? As I said, it's a bit of a just throw it out and see what you all think approach.
I like it. I think it describes the areas where, yeah, the things that you need. Just another small element that I was thinking, and we don't have it in the table, is knowledge of the language. And I don't know if this is as important or not, but because data stewards at this point are not that many, I think it's important that English is quite well versed in a person. But then again, if we are talking about larger organization or larger country, I'm just thinking like, French or Germany, perhaps that's not needed. But yeah, it's something that you normally don't necessarily see in the descriptions. But I'm not certain if it's something to consider, but Andrea, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, so I expect this to take a little bit more narrative than a slide would be able to give you. So I'm not sure if you're really thinking about it as almost like an index card that you're looking at versus a one pager. I imagine I would see it on a one pager. That would be enough. I also I worry when I see things like contract type, salary, talking about remote versus not remote work, all that sort of stuff, that we're narrowing down a persona to a very specific job. And if we want to do a persona, I don't think those things are necessary. If you're looking at an entry-level data steward who's coming from a library background, that's one thing, or a postdoc with a disciplinary PhD in a data steward position for a specific lab. I think those are broad enough where you don't necessarily need the contract type, salary range, all those things that seem to be specific to a given job
No, I think that's
or
it's a
even
really
country,
big point.
you know. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I think they're very well received comments. I think the question I would want to ask the two of you or anybody else who wants to answer is because the aim is also of this group is to also think about career tracks, right? And how those personas could be linked up to a career track. So that, for example, let's say at an organization or a national body could use the methodology to think through what does it mean to develop sustainable career paths for data stewards. And so it's not just the individual, like one persona, but to think about like, a group of personas that are linked to each other. So are there like how, and oftentimes when we think of careers, especially when we fall into the trap of thinking of careers in a very linear way, things like salary, for example, become those, just increase the salary and there's movement, there's a career there. So how should we think about linking personas? What categories could help us? Where should we focus to highlight progression? Which in the working group, we very much try to not think about in linear terms. Progression can also be sideways. Progression can be also, going more in depth. Progression can mean different things for different people. But yeah, so it's this is also a consideration to be made.
I mean, I would agree with your points about things like contract. I mean, I salary range and things. I personally think is probably less useful thinking about it from my context because those are all sort of set. The contract type one, I think, was something that came up in our survey and other things about the difference in the when we had the narrative responses in the survey was about people who were sort of on project-based roles, which tended to be more fixed term in their contracts, and the jobs that were more sort of, I suppose, based in sort of central service type of teams like libraries, which tended to be more sort of open-ended contracts, was something that we saw. And I think that's why the contract type has possibly been highlighted. It doesn't mean that it needs to stay in the template or things, but I think that was one of the distinctive things that people were sort of saying that they. They felt they would be moving maybe into a more, they might move out of data stewardship to progress because partly that the jobs were very short-lived in data stewardship, but this was a few years ago, and it could have just been the people who were responding from that type of role. So I think it's how we reflect those sort of more project-based data steward roles and compared to those more, I suppose, central service type of roles as well.
But I think this is exactly what you're now saying. So when we define, let's say, define a persona, um, it will also have with itself additional information. So like contract type. So if you are, let's say, a data manager for a specific project, which then, it's specific type of data stewards for the project type, then the contract type probably will be project based. But if you're a data steward that is embedded in organization, probably that might, I mean, we would expect that it's more of a long-term element. So I think it really depends on what will be the role of a person in the back. Um, but yeah, it's still we see, I think the point is that currently um, data stewardship roles are still not really clearly defined in the organizations, and hence organizations are really basically trying to play around with what is going to happen. And that's why they currently don't have a long-standing contracts, I think. So basically, it's something that they try to get additional funding from universities or something, and that is something that is not then a permanent role. So I currently don't know any data steward in my country that would have a contract that is actually I think most currently would end now this year. It's only one person that has a contract until 2030. But that I think it's a point of the development of a job position as it is more than anything else.
Yeah. And it might be that job position or something is a better way of phrasing things than saying contract type or something. Um, it might be the sort of, yeah, so that we can say it's project based or what we got, because as you say, there's people have no influence over contract types and things.
It's true. Or alternatively, that could be one of those ones where you have to adapt it to your particular context, right? So it's because I think that's the other thing with this template. It's not that we're going to require, I mean, we're not going to really do anything, but if you use it, it's a guiding document, right? So if you decide, in Germany's context, like it doesn't make sense to have contract type. But in the United States, I would say that this is very useful information to design a profile because we do have ones, you see ads for stewards that are contract based. So it's like it's a 2-year contract for a particular project and then it ends. But you also see things like research data librarians, which are long-term contracts. And I think things like the motivations and expectations for those different types can vary. And so that is an instance, I think, where context is important. Um, but I think you also just provide there a really good example of how to use the template best for your situation. So maybe like I feel like that's good feedback, like making it really clear that these are not necessarily like required for you to use the persona at like, I don't know, I'm looking at the crowd at least in Elizabeth's face to see if I'm way off the mark here.
Yeah,
But
I think it's finding, I think what we might like to do in the template is try and find those ones which we think are generic enough that fit within any context. And then we have our longer list of pick and choose. Um, as this is supposed to be, this isn't a we're not writing a standard, you know. It's an aid, it's a tool that we hope that people will be able to use. It's not aiming to be a definitive standard or anything. So yeah, we have options.
So can I ask
And
also,
to stop people having to do all this themselves. And I think one of the things of you know, trying to have some sort of shared understanding within the community from, you know, the point of having done the co-creation with different countries and things, is so that we can try and understand across countries as well, so that we are kind of being able to show what data stewardship looks like in different contexts, but in a comparable way, so that we understand each other.
can I just ask a really practical question? How is your situation in your countries? Because in Slovenia, we don't really have career stages for expert positions. So it's only for the professors or researchers that would have, kind of young researcher, medium something, then kind of an expert, or then you have a professor and regular professor, etc. But for the, for people that are working in expert positions like librarians or so, we don't have career stages at all. I mean, the only difference is that you get paid depending on the how many years you actually worked in different positions in, let's say, public offices. So I'm just wondering what we actually want to do here. Because as Lisa know, we have since actually January last year two positions for data stewards actually in our national contracts and or national descriptions, and they're basically just linked to the education. So it's one with the bachelor, another one is with the PhD. But that's not a career, It's basically the type of education. It will not change if you are in this office for 10 years. You will not get next career stage if you don't have a PhD. So I'm just wondering how it is in your countries for the expert positions, if you have these stages.
Yeah, I think in Italy it's quite similar, with only difference that data stewards are often hired not with the technical administrative contracts, but rather with research contracts, with very precarious research contracts. And this also means that they get really stuck, because for any advancement they would be assessed as researchers, but obviously they're not doing research, so they're not producing, so to say, the output that would get them any research-based promotion, and they're just stuck in very, very precarious contract positions. But they're hired with those research contracts because the research contracts pay more than the technical administrative contracts. So it's actually quite a big discussion at the moment in a number of Italian universities with bigger data steward programs, because they can only give short-term contracts, so they have to make a choice, give a shorter contract, train a person who leaves after 2 years because the contract is over and we cannot renew the contract, or we give them a technical administrative contract, which the person will be technical administrative staff forever, and the only pay rise that comes is from basically years on the job, seniority type of thing, but those pay so much less, and then the steward might still leave because they take a pay cut even though they get a permanent contract. So I think these are issues, at least from Italian perspective. This is an issue here.
And in the United States, frankly, it's a free-for-all. Like in terms of standards, we don't really have any. It's very institution specific. So I work at a national lab. We have bands that have different requirements depending on what category you're in. But I'm in like a weird, I honestly couldn't tell you. There is not a data curator or a data manager job profile at all at my institution. Whereas at some universities, uh, the titles are very different. You can be like a data curator, or you could be a data librarian. You could be considered staff. You could be considered professional. You could be considered tenure track is another option where you're treated like a researcher in terms of expected outputs. But frankly, there is no national standard, and it really is just based on your institution. Um, for what kind of contract you have, how that works in terms of promotion or advancement, um, which makes at least for me this group really interesting to see what especially a lot of European countries are doing because they it seem have actually started and have standardizations of some type um, that we can take lessons from. And if I would say if there's anybody else on the call that wants to talk about their country and how it works there, that would be also welcome and interesting.
I think in the UK it depends on where you are. I don't work in the university, so I don't know if there's any comparisons across, but it's more like free for all. But on the career stage, for this exercise, I don't think it necessarily needs to be something formal. It could, because we're talking about personas and not job descriptions and not necessarily things, it could be like first data steward type related role. It could be numbers of years in a role. So I think you could interpret, and this is where our documentation needs to come in, is you can interpret, I can't say that word, career stage as being, however, it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal standard. It could just be it's got the narrative to give a, if it's their first job or a moving into a second job or numbers of years in a role or something. So I think we can create flexibility about that so that it does mean something useful. And I think, again, we also recognizing the fact that this is about data stewardship type roles rather than necessarily people who are always going to be called data stewards, as we know that a lot of people doing data stewardship don't have data stewardship in their job title or might not even have it in there anywhere in their job description. But when you look at what a data steward does, that's what they're doing.
And
But
I actually think that it is really important that this group thinks about career track also in the context of where the formal role and maybe even the title is never changing. So, because I think, in library context, but also, in those examples, for example, the same Italian context example, the person might be for 10, 20 years in a role where, they're in with a contract that's always the same. The pay range in a way is always the same. But what does it mean, when all the formal conditions are the same, but informal, career track? What does it mean to be mid-career or senior career in this context? And it's in one of the workshops, we actually workshopped this with the group. And the group had quite a bit of input on, for example, the categories that started to come up was like leadership, having, taking on more mentoring, working with younger colleagues, The other category that came up was training opportunities and continued professional development opportunities. So learning new skills. And then also what came up was so disciplinary focus, basically going in depth in something. And so I think it's also those informal categories or aspects of what does make a career. If in terms of formal structure, nothing changes, but how can the data steward still feel that they're having fulfilling career and they don't want to leave the job, because I think one of the questions is very much like, how do we retain data stewards once they're there, and what needs to happen to retain them.
So it's remembering, I think, that we're talking about different types of career tracks. It doesn't necessarily mean about a hierarchical promotion or anything like that. It's about how roles can develop as well. I've just seen the time, so do you think I was to say thank you, that's really helpful, and we've probably just got two more slides, have we, before we move on, as it's 5 to the hour. So we probably want to wrap up. So I think this is just a final, as I said, we've been having career journey speaker series where people have been sharing their career journeys and how they've come about. These are happening within our working group meetings. So it's just if anybody would like to share their career journey, we're always looking for people to present those at our working groups, and you can get in touch with any of us directly or via the working group page, because part of the point of the working groups as well and the workshops and this activity is also for us all to network and share our experiences as well, not just to have the outputs of the working group, but that we can all learn from each other and have a wider understanding of how things work. So like just as that example of what is it like in another country, what does it mean for you? Which is really helpful. So I think with 3 minutes to go for me, 3 minutes to midnight. So I think unless anybody has any other final comments or anything, thank you everybody for coming today. I did that today again to cover all time zones, especially for those of you who are in Europe. And it is getting increasingly later. I mean, actually, yes, today could be tomorrow, as for some of you, but we do thank you. We will continue working on the outputs. It's really, really great feedback, and we have some more workshops, which some of you may well be at in the future. And please do stay in touch with the working group. Obviously, before we actually put out the final documentation, we will be putting things out for community comment and feedback as well. Maybe before October, maybe around October. We haven't quite got the timing. So if you're not actively joining our working group meetings, do look out for any communications that are coming from us so that we can continue to have your valid and valuable input. So thank you very much. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the virtual plenary and any of the sessions that you're going to. And my final thing is I really hope to see some of you in October in London at the plenary that we at STFC UKRI are organising. And as I say to everybody, I feel I'm actually contractually obliged to promote it at every opportunity. But it will be hopefully where we will be wrapping up the working group as well. So we do hope to see people. If not before, we hope to see people then. So thank you. And